Welcome to those of you that are starting to join for today's session on metrics. We'll get started here in probably about 2 or 3 minutes. Give everybody, give the stragglers a few moments to join. Check back in with you in a few moments. All right, welcome to those of you that are joining or have joined. We're going to get started here in just about another, call it 30 seconds. So grab a beverage, grab a snack, and we'll get started here in about 30 seconds. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Welcome everybody to today's session. My name is Josh Broltheim. I'm the training manager at Sumo Logic. And what we're going to be doing over the next 3 hours or so is going over metrics mastery. This is a certification class. Hopefully you're here for metrics mastery. We'll talk about the certification in a little more detail shortly, but hopefully you're in the right place. For today, of course, if there's any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I'm running this by myself and we have a small group, so I should be able to assist anybody that needs help, but we'll go ahead and get started here right now. So away we go. So the first thing is the course agenda. I want to talk about what we're going to be doing over the next few hours. Here's the agenda. So we're going to talk about the course logistics first, and that's kind of what I'm doing now, is starting to get into some of that. And then we're going to look at or talk about reviewing the basics. Then we're going to look at collecting metrics. We're going to analyze metrics. We're going to do some use cases. We have a lot of labs for you today. So today is pretty, not lab heavy necessarily. Well, yeah, it is actually lab heavy. I think we have 10 of them in total. So we'll start with a few slides, and then we'll really get into labs where we'll interactively start to do some work together, which I think or hope you'll enjoy. Then we'll go ahead, we'll take a break somewhere in there, and then we'll finish up, and then we'll take that examination. So that's the game plan for today. And once again, questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. I want to remind you of a promotion we're doing, and I'll paste this URL in the chat as well. What this is our Uber Eats promotion. So as a reminder, or if you're not aware at all, if you take one of our classes, which you're doing today, and pass the exam, which you'll be doing later today, once you're done, you get a free $15 Uber Eats voucher. So by filling in the form that I just pasted in the chat, and I'll share this URL later for you guys, you've earned a free meal. Typically in the past, the old world, if you will, we would do these in person. And so we'd actually get to interact. And one of the fun of things of being together is we'd usually be able to buy you a meal. So we would provide lunch or dinner or whatever it might be. Well, currently we can't do that right now, but we still want to give you some incentive, some food. So that's kind of the goal of today, or not the primary goal, but one of the goals of today is to get you fed. So I'll remind you about that promotion later, but I'm reminding you about it now. So let's go ahead and dive in here. So I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, I probably have about 5 or 10 slides to start, and then we'll get into labs and get a little more interactive. So let me just get this loaded. Okay. And so now we're going to talk about the basics. I'm not really do a demo, but yeah, let's just jump in here. So I want to talk about metrics first. What are they? Hopefully you're aware of what they are, but if you're not, this is the appropriate class for you. So metrics, in the way we're going to be talking about them today, are a set of data points that measure the value of something over time. And so there's three, the parts that are bolded are really the important portions there, but it's a data point, it's a measurement of a value, and it's over time. And that over time is probably not the most important portion of that sentence, but one of them. So for example, the everyday metrics we have listed here. If you want to go ahead and measure your temperature on an hourly basis, that would be a metric because it's a data point or a group of data points that's measuring the value of something, your temperature, over a period of time, which is an hour. Your weight once a week. That's a metric that we might be familiar with, might not be appreciating the way it's going in what direction, but certainly we can see our metrics of if we weigh ourselves each week over time. How are we doing? Height of a child every 6 months, same idea. You start to measure that progress over time using data points. It's measuring the value of something that combined forms a metric. How can metrics be used in your environments? Well, once again, kind of similar to what I said earlier. Hopefully, if you're here, you know that metrics are somewhat important, at least to understand what they are and how they can be used in your environment. So here's a couple. There's hundreds, thousands, but tracking KPIs over time, those key performance indicators. Once again, data points measuring the value of something over time. Those metrics that we show here in this graph on the top right, for example, it's showing us CPU and total memory, and it's showing us, once again, over time, it's showing us some visualization for that. Metrics can be helpful to understand if an outage has occurred, and that can also be a good place to utilize your metrics. There we go. And then determining why an event occurred or how it might be prevented in the future. These are just some of the ways metrics can help you. Not a comprehensive list by any means, but just a couple of examples to get us started. Now, how are logs and metrics different? They sound maybe at face value similar. They're both recording something. They're a measurement. They have data points in them. So what's the difference? Well, very top of the screen, basically the difference is as such. For metrics, it's once again that numeric measurement of data collected over time. That over time is really the key portion of metrics, where logs are just records of events that have occurred, not over a period of time, just records of events that have occurred, period. So for example, or not for example, rather, excuse me, I have this little review section down here. For these 5 items here, are they logs or metrics? And I'm going to go through them one by one, but certainly want you to think of your answer. And if you want to put it in chat, great. You don't have to, but for example, the wind patterns for the last 24 hours, is that a log or is that a metric? Now that's going to be a metric because it's a data collection over a period of time, that last 24 hours. If we were collecting wind patterns that showed every time wind exceeds 20 knots, is that a log or a metric? Now, in that case, that's going to be a log because it's a measurement of something, but it doesn't have a time period. We're just saying every time, not a specific time period. If we said every time the wind exceeded 20 knots over the last 2 weeks, then it becomes a metric. Log or metric, CPU uptime for the last 15 minutes. Well, kind of had a little hint over here, although not an exact hint, but that's showing metrics as well because it's the value of something, CPU usage, over a period of time, the last 15 minutes. Failed logins, is that a metric or a log? Now that's going to be a log. Each time someone fails to log in would be a log. The combination of those over a period of time turns it into a metric. Hopefully it's, I was going to say not getting too repetitive. Hopefully it is, and you're understanding the difference between the two. And then finally, the number of server errors on an hourly basis, utilizing that time period, utilizing that data collection of something, and so that becomes a metric as well. I thought that was a good little quiz that we put together. Now, Sumo Logic data flow, hopefully you've seen this slide before. If you've attended our fundamentals class or a few other classes, this slide kind of pops up. And it's a really simple, not overly simple, but a good simplified understanding of Sumo Logic. So in step 1 is data collection. As a reminder, you have data outside in the world. It might be logs, it might be metrics. For today's class, we're going to really focus on the metrics, but your data is out there. It might be in the server farm, it might be in the cloud, it might be in the server underneath your desk. Regardless, that data needs to be collected and brought into Sumo Logic. And that's what data collection is all about. It's going to be relevant for us today because one of the first labs we're going to do is install a collector on our device, our laptop, or whatever device we're using, most likely a laptop. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take data that's been collected or generated by our laptops and send it into Sumo Logic. So we're going to be able to look at those metrics shortly. Now, once those metrics arrive into Sumo Logic, that's where step 2 comes in, with the searching and analyzing. The metrics after step 1 are basically just kind of hanging out and sitting there. But, well, if it's not elaborate enough, they're in a, well, I guess they're sitting there, they're in a repository, they're on Sumo's side, but then you need to start to use the operators to start to slice and dice your data. Now, if you've taken one of our logs classes, more specifically like a search mastery or our cloud security and monitoring, you might be aware of our query language. For metrics, it's a bit different. So we're going to go through some of the query language and just talk about it a little bit later. Using the query language, expressing your data in charts. So if you're looking at something like CPU uptime, seeing a chart of it going up and going down is, or might be, quite helpful. And then that visualizing and monitoring, taking that information that you searched and analyzed and starting to present it in a way that might be more helpful. Maybe putting it in a dashboard on a big screen with graphs showing, what's going on. Maybe sending out an alert every time your metrics get to a certain level. If you're interested in CPU uptime over the past week and it drips or drops down below 50%, 20%, whatever number is important to you, you might want to get notified about that. And you can create an alert. And we're going to look at how to do that. I think that's the last thing we do today, but we will be doing that today as well. All right. And once again, questions, post them in the chat, please. So want to talk a little bit more specifically about collecting metrics, which is essentially in this on this slide, it's talking about step 1. So if you've attended our administration class, this is also, or should be, familiar to you. What we're describing here are the different type of collectors that you can utilize within Sumo Logic. There's going to be 2 types of collectors we're going to talk about today. There's actually a third, but that's two for now is enough. Now, what I'm trying to show here on this top of the screen is at the very center is that Sumo Logic Cloud. That's where all the data needs to arrive or needs to be held that you ingest, that you collect. And so that's kind of the ultimate destination, is that Sumo Logic Cloud. However, on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the screen, aside from that center, are the different collector options, specifically the hosted collector option and the installed collector option. Now, when are you going to use either one? What's the difference? Why do we have 2 names? Well, I'm going to describe it right now. On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm trying to demonstrate what we call really hosted cloud properties is kind of the name I use for them. And what I'm referring to there are cloud applications. AWS, probably the primary one. GCP, O365. Maybe you use Salesforce. Maybe you're using Okta, OneLogin. All those are, all the ones I mentioned are cloud-based environments. In order for Sumo Logic to be able to assist you with the data, once again, remember that data needs to be sent to Sumo Logic. And in that case, where the data is hosted in the cloud, you can utilize one of our hosted collectors. And essentially what you're going to do, and long story short of it, is basically you tell us, all right, here's where my AWS data is, here are my credentials, and on your behalf, we go ahead and grab that data and bring it into Sumo Logic. It's a little more complex, a little more encrypted than that, but that's the basic gist of it, is you give us permission, we grab the data and bring it into Sumo Logic. And that's very common for those newer technologies, like I was mentioned, those cloud properties. Now, on the right-hand side of the screen, we have traditional or older environments. And at my age, to say that those are older environments sounds a little weird, but they are. These are environments that are really traditionally kind of more bare metal, bare bones, a server farm, a device underneath the desk. And in those cases where it's a physical device, you can actually install what we call a collector. And this is a step we're going to do in about 15, 20 minutes, where we are actually going to install this lightweight agent called a collector on our device. And that lightweight agent is going to send the data into the Sumo Logic Cloud. Now, the end result is the same. Left-hand side of the screen or right-hand side of the screen, the data is coming to Sumo Logic. It's just dependent on where that data is in the first place. Is it in the cloud or is it in a more traditional environment? And it's not an either or necessarily. It can be an and. We have customers that have one collector. We have customers that have two collectors, one for hosted, one for installed. We have customers that have hundreds and thousands and even tens of thousands of collectors. And there's no right or wrong way to do it, although there are certainly guidelines or recommendations, but you might need more than one collector. To take it even a step further, with the installed collectors that I'm showing on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm showing two different flavors, I guess you could say. It's the same collector. It's just where in the environment do you install it? On the top of the screen, I'm showing centralized data collection. And what we would represent there is the idea that you have all these devices that are generating data. Might be logs, might be metrics. For today, it's mostly metrics, but regardless. Now, in that case, you can install the collector and you can install it on a central device. And what can happen there is all of your devices can communicate to that central collector, and then that central collector can reach out to Sumo Logic and send us your data. That's one approach. It works great. Might be appropriate for you, might not, but it's a highly recommended solution. Another solution that you might prefer is what we call local data collection. In this case, very similar to the one above it, but the difference is you would install the collector in multiple places. So if you have 8 machines in the top version, you might install it on a single collector, and those 8 machines communicate with one collector that sends to Sumo Logic. Conversely, if you don't want to kind of bottleneck yourself, if you will, you could have 8 collectors on 8 different devices. And that would be the local data collection model. Once again, you can have a hybrid model where you have some hosted, you have some installed, you have some local installed, some centralized, many different options. And today, the idea is just to introduce you to those options. All right, let's see, questions? I think we're good. Let's keep going. Now, this is a very similar slide as the one previously. It's actually flip-flopped, but what I'm trying to show here on the right-hand side of the screen are those hosted collectors, as I was alluding to, those AWS properties, Azure, GCP, I think I mentioned Salesforce, Okta, et cetera, and those all live in the cloud. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you have your more traditional environments, things that are sitting behind firewalls that might be generating host metrics or local files or streaming metrics. And so those all need to come into Sumo Logic. Once again, the end result is the same. The data is arriving into Sumo Logic and is sitting there in Sumo waiting for you to provide instructions, but that's how we get it into Sumo Logic. All right, this slide don't need to get too bogged down in the details, but I think it's important for you to know that metric and log ingestion are calculated or well, it says here, ingested and retention or retained in a little bit different manner. So with log data, you can give us your log data. You can give us your log data from yesterday, from last month, from last year. If you want to send in your past 15 years of logs to us, great. We're happy to help you with them. Metrics work a little bit differently. As it says here, metrics, Sumo does not ingest metric data that's more than 1 week old. So if you want to start utilizing Sumo for metrics, it's going to be more recent data. In addition to that fact that it's going to be more recent data that's going to be ingested, the retention policy is a little bit different. The details here are not that important. You're not really going to be quizzed on them or really even need to know them too much, but I thought it was important enough just to point it out. And so what we see here with the metric retention is the way or the fact that data is stored for a different period of time. So that raw data, that raw metric data, that's kept for 7 days. If you utilize the 1-minute resolutions, which is actually if we're using metrics and we're using our time periods of 1 minute, those are kept for 30 days. The 1-hour resolutions, larger time period, kept for a larger time range or time period. So 1-hour resolutions get retained for 13 months. And so just wanted to let you know about that. Not the most important thing, but it was requested that I put a slide in here about it. So I did, and that's the slide. All right, let's talk about analyzing metrics. So what we're going to be doing with metrics is we're going to be utilizing key value pairs. What I have up here are an example of 3 different metrics queries, all related, of course, but different. And so we're going to look at these and show you or discuss the differences. We'll shortly, as I've alluded to, get into the labs where we'll actually do some of this stuff. But for right now, I just wanted to start with the visuals. So for this example, we're going to get a little international. I guess it depends where you are, but in this case, for me being in Portland, Oregon, we're going to be talking about Spain, and that's kind of international. So what are we going to be doing here? Or what is this metrics query showing us? What we want to talk about is the wind speed in Spain for the last 24 hours. So imagine we have a bunch of wind data that's coming into Sumo Logic, which is a use case. And we want to start to look at those different devices and start to see what is the wind speed here, what is it there, et cetera, et cetera. Now, remember, since we're doing metrics, time is relevant. And so that's why we're saying analyzing the wind speed in Spain for the last 24 hours. If we just said, let's look at the wind speed in Spain, logs might be a better fit there. But since we're defining that time period, it becomes a metric, or metrics become a better use case. So in the first one, if we want to look at all devices in Spain, and let's say there's 255 of them, we can say, look at the metric for wind speed for the region of EU for the country equal to Spain. Now, the region equal EU, we don't really need even in there because the system is going to know country equals Spain. The region is just not relevant. I put it in here. It's probably a touch overkill, but I put it in anyhow. So with this first line, this would bring back all the stations. Every station that's in Spain would report its metric on wind speed. Now, what if we care about Valencia, which is a city in Spain? Now, what we can do is we can use our filtering in the form of key value pairs to say, don't just show us country equals Spain, show us city equals Valencia. And in that case, it's going to look just for those wind devices that are in Valencia. There's 3 of them, and it will show those 3 values. Now, we can take it a step further in the last line where we're still looking at Valencia, but now we're taking the average. Because the wind speed in the second line might show us 20 miles an hour, I guess it'd be kilometers, but 20 knots, 30 knots, and 40 knots, where the bottom line is saying take the average. Take that 20, take that 30, take that 40, add them up, divide them by 3, and now we get an average. And so we can start to use the query language and utilize those operators to slice and dice our data and get back what's relevant to us. Do we want a list of 255 devices? Line 1 is the way to go. Do we want the average of 3 devices in Valencia? The bottom line is the way to go. And we'll look at these operators in more detail starting very soon, specifically right here. So let me go and grab this line right here. And what I'm sharing with you is a list of the metrics operators. If you've joined our logs classes, specifically Cert Mastery is where we really go over it, we have a list of log operators, and that list is quite extensive. I don't know if it's 100 items yet, but it's probably pretty close. Metrics, not as much, but we have operators, and here's a list of the operators. Most of them are mathematically related, but as you can see here, here's the operator, here's what it does, and here's an example. And we'll go ahead and utilize, like I said, some of these shortly. But right here, we see the average, how to use it. And so average is an operator we can take advantage of. The other operators, as you see right here, are, like I mentioned, kind of mathematically related. Many of them, very straightforward: average, max, min, percentage. I feel like that's pretty straightforward. Some of them get a little more detailed, and so we'll look at a few of these today. All right, let's go ahead and, let's do it. Let's log into our training environment. So let me go ahead and put these credentials in the chat. If you've ever used our training environment before, you kind of know where I'm heading. If you haven't, just hang on and we'll get through this together. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into service.sumologic.com. And so that's going to be our training environment. It's also where you go to log into Sumo. So you hopefully are aware of that. The email we're going to use is going to be training plus admin number. And I want you to select the number. So I want you to select a 3-digit number. Maybe you want to be training plus admin 007 at sumologic.com, training plus admin 123, training plus admin 794, 831, pick a 3-digit number. And then you're going to use the password of summer 22 ! With that capital S. So let's go ahead and get logged in. Once you get logged in, if you can type your 3-digit number in the chat. If there's overlap for today, it doesn't really matter. It's just helpful for me to make sure that you guys are logging in successfully. So I'm going to go ahead and do so now. So like I said, I'm going to go to service.sumologic.com. I'm going to type in the account of training plus admin. I use 234 just for no good reason, but that's what I usually use. Sumologic.com. And that password is once again summer22 exclamation point. So go ahead and log in. I'm going to pause or kind of hang out here for a second. So give everybody a moment or two. With these credentials, once again, if you've used these before, you kind of know where I'm going with this. But if not, this is a training environment. It's a shared environment. Don't put anything proprietary in here, kind of yada, yada, yada. That being said, you're welcome to use these credentials after today. So these credentials will be good for the rest of the month. And so if you want to log into a system that has data, as you'll see shortly, this is a perfectly good environment to use. All right, let's see. I think we're pretty much logged in. If anybody needs another moment to holler, it's not a big deal. But I think we're about good. All right, and while you're getting logged in, what I'm going to include in here is the lab guide. So let me do that. I should have done that kind of first, but nevertheless. All right, so what I just put into the chat is a PDF lab guide. So hopefully you have that open. So ideally you have Sumo Logic open and you're logged into our student or training account, and you have your lab guide open, which we'll use pretty much for the rest of the day. Yeah, we don't really go to slides. Yeah, well, we do go to slide. We'll go back to slides later. And actually, let me think. Let's go through this slide. We'll go through a couple slides real fast. Yeah, let's go through these real quickly, and then we'll get into the app. Already, if you're already logged in and you want to poke around, that's fine. But I'll just actually, you know, let's log in together. So we're going to do the lab guide. I'm sorry, I keep this flip-flopping between going through these slides or not. But let's go through the lab guide first. We'll come back to the slides later. So in our lab guide, there should be a variety of different labs. There should be 10 labs in here. And so we're going to get started in here. Introduction, pretty generic introduction. And what I want us to do is get to lab 1. So in lab 1, what we're going to do is we're going to install the collector. It's going to be that lightweight application that we're going to install on your device, or you're going to install on your device, which most likely would be your laptop. Ideally, hopefully you can participate in this lab. It's possible you may not be able to, not because Sumo Logic isn't letting you, but your own organization. You might not be able to install Collector on your device. It's just possible that your administrator is not allowing that. And so if that's the case, while it's unfortunate you can't participate in the first or second lab, you'll be able to participate in the other one. So if you can't participate, don't worry about it. I'm going to go through the steps. If you can, you know, all the better. Please join in. So let's go through this. Let me hide my lab guide here and let me get Sumo Logic open. And that's good enough. And let's begin. What we're going to do first is we're going to go to the left-hand side of the screen. Hopefully you see this black bar, but if you don't, you can click on the 3 horizontal lines to expand it out. In this black bar, what I want you to go and do next, and we're just following the lab guide, is go to Manage Data and go to Collection. When we do, what we're looking at are all the collectors that are installed in our account, in this case, our training account. Now, in the real world, it's possible you may not be able to access this screen. This is a screen or a portion of the system that an administrator can say, I don't want you accessing, or I do. And so it's possible, like I said, if you go home and use your account, you may not get this access. But for today, of course, we want to give it to you. And what we're looking at are all the collectors. We see each collector's name. If I mouse over it, we see some information about who created it. When was it updated? We see the health of it. Is it healthy or not? That's kind of important. We see the type. Is it a hosted collector or is it an installed collector? And that's where I was differentiating or attempting to differentiate those differences between the installed and the hosted. Over here, we see source categories. We'll get into that a little bit later, but that's the naming or the name that we're using for our data, that we're attributing to our data so that we can identify our data. We see over here, here's a better example, we see a graph, which is showing us our data arriving into the system. It's also showing us the amount of messages we've had. So we can get a visual confirmation here that data is arriving in the system. Now, that's not really relevant for today's conversation, but I want to show it anyhow. What we want to do now is we want to add a new collector. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the top of the screen and click Add Collector. When we do, we're going to need to decide what type of collector do we want to utilize, the installed collector or the hosted collector. For today, we're going to ignore this open telemetry option. This is a newer way of collecting data, but it's not the focus for today. And so we're going to utilize the installed collector method. When I select the installed collector method, and before I click on it, it's telling me here what it's going to do. It's going to install a Java agent that receives logs and metrics from its sources. And so that's what I want. I'm going to click on that, and then I'm going to select the operating system I'm utilizing. Am I on Mac? Am I on Windows? Am I using a Linux flavor? In this case, I'm on a Mac. And so I'm going to click on the Mac OS, and I'm going to start to download that collector. It might take a minute, it might take a second, depends really on your own bandwidth, but regardless, the collector should be downloading over a relatively short period of time, hopefully. Yeah, just making sure we're together. Now what we're going to do once yours is done downloading, easy for me to say, is now we're going to install the collector. Now, the majority of these steps are installing an application. Like any other application in the world, you're going to accept terms and agreements and things like that. But we're going to go through those steps together because that's the point of today. So to open up my file, I'm going to click on my DMG. I have my little wizard here. It's going to take a moment, primarily because, there we go, because my device is locked down. So I'm going to get some requests about wanting to confirm that I want to run this file. I should have gotten that already. So hopefully your collector is unpacking. And let me go ahead. Right. And so hopefully what you ultimately come out with is a setup wizard. And once again, that's very straightforward steps, but we're going to do them together. So I'm going to go ahead and click next because we want to start the wizard going. We're going to blindly accept the term and agreement and devote our first son to Sumo Logic. Then we're going to decide the directory. Where do we want to install the collector? The default is probably sufficient, but if you have a specific directory where you want to install it, once again, you can customize it here. Now it's going to prepare to install. And now it should start to extract those files. Once again, very typical to any other installation. Yours might be a little slower, might be a little faster, just depending kind of where you are in the process, but we'll keep going and I'll pause at the end to make sure we're all caught up. But ultimately, what I want to get to is this screen. And so what's on this screen and what do I want to possibly modify? Well, what I want to point out is the collector name. Now, by default, the collector name is going to inherit or be the computer name. And so my computer name is jbrothheim-Mac. I'm on a Mac. My name is Jay Brothheim. The collector name and computer name kind of makes sense. I want you, in this case, for you to recognize what the collector name is and possibly modify it. The only reason I would want you to modify it is just so I want you to find it later, because in a few moments, we're going to have to go into the collection screen in Sumo Logic and find our collector. So it's just important you know the name of it. If it's something too personal, feel free to modify it and call it test, but just want you to be able to recognize it shortly. The rest of the items in here we can leave as is. We could go ahead and set up a proxy if we needed to, or time zone. We're going to do that actually later in a different place, but we could do that here if required. In this case, I don't need to do anything here, so I'm just going to click next. And I'm going to click next on this portion, confirming that I want to keep my collector name as jbrotheim-mac. Now, this next portion is critical. This is the portion where we now need to tell the collector how we want to authenticate with Sumo Logic. In this case, we have a collector installed or starting to be installed on our device. We have Sumo Logic, and we need to establish a connection between the two. And of course, that connection needs to be secure. And so we need to use some sort of authentication. Here we have two choices. We can use a token and we can use an access key. For this exercise, we're going to use an access key. They're basically the same. Just I've always shown access key, and so I will continue to show access key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click access key and next. Now I need to provide the access key and the access ID. And so I need to get those pieces of information. Those pieces of information can be found within Sumo Logic. So I'm still going to keep my window open here. I'm going to kind of just move these over a little bit. And so I still have my install wizard open, but now what I'm going to do, and I don't need this portion anymore, is I'm going to go back into Sumo Logic. Just modify this just a tiny, there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the left-hand side of the screen. I'm going to go to my training user or the user account, which is going to be on the bottom left of the screen. When I find my name, or in this case, training number, whatever, I'm going to go to preferences. When I go to preferences, I'm going to see if my account has any access keys already created. If it does, it's not really relevant to today's conversation, but if there were some keys already created by yourself, they would be listed here. But in this case, we want to create a new access key. So what I'm going to click on is add access key. I'm going to give it a name. I'm not going to be overly creative with my name. In this case, I'm going to call it test 234. I'm just not very creative. And so for you, put your initials, put the number, that's a fine enough name. The domain portion, not relevant to this conversation, so I'm just going to click on create key. Now, when I do, I'm going to get two pieces of information back. I'm going to get my access ID and I'm going to get my access key. And what I need to now do is paste those into the appropriate boxes in the setup wizard. So I'm going to go to my access ID and copy it. And I should be able to paste it. There we go. I'm going to go to my access key. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go and paste it. Now, ideally, I have these two entered correctly. Easier said than done. Not easier said than done. It's quite easy to do correctly, but ideally, I have these correctly set. Now, when I click next, the verification that these are correctly set is going to occur. And when I click next, what's going to happen is, as it says, please hold while we connect to Sumo Logic. The system is now attempting to use those credentials to log in or authenticate with Sumo Logic. It's either going to be successful or it's going to fail. Still connecting. It's going to take another 5 or 10 seconds. And I didn't get any error message, which means I was successful. Hopefully you arrived to the same place. And ideally, you should now be able to click finish. Now, what we've done there is now install the collector. If you did not get to that last finish, maybe you entered your access ID and key upside down. Maybe you left off a character in the access key. There's going to be some reason why it didn't work, because it should work automatically. And hopefully yours worked. Now, once we're done here, or once we've entered those ID and keys, once we click done here, we will never see this access key again. So if we want to save it, now would be the appropriate time to. And by saving it, you might have some internal policy where maybe you save these type of things to an internal locker. You can always recreate a new one. But if you don't need it, that's fine too. So I'm going to click done. And what you'll see here is now I see my access key, the label I gave it, the ID, but I'll never see that key again. And so if I needed to add a new one, I could just add another access key. I could also delete this or deactivate it. Not really relevant for right now, but I do have those options. All right, so we should be just about done with lab 1. Now there's one more step to lab 1, which is, I don't know if it's the most important, but it's going to be the most telling, because what I want to do now is look for our collector. So what we should do now, assuming everything just went okay, we're going to go back to manage data, and we're going to go back to collection. And now we're going to go back to our collectors. What we're going to do now is we're going to look for our collector. So we're going to go up to the search box, or yeah, search box, I'll call it. And I'm now going to look for my collector, which was called jbrotheim-mac. And what do you know? There it is. Now, what do I know about this collector, or what is the screen telling me? Well, it's telling me the name of the collector. It's telling me if I highlight over it, when it was created, when it was last updated. Both are the same because that just occurred about 30 seconds ago. I see the health of the collector. And I see the type of collector. In this case, it's installed. Now, what I don't see here, and intentionally so, is any data. And that's correct. Because right now we've installed this collector, we've installed this lightweight agent on our device. It's able to communicate with Sumo Logic. It can ping pong back and forth, if you will. We just verified that with the credentials, but we're not sending any data because we haven't specified what data to send. That's what we're going to do in the next step, but that's where we're about to get up to. So hopefully this is where you're at. If you're not, let me know, because I'd like you to get to the same spot as me. Yeah, but I think you guys are quiet, so I'm going to assume we're all together, and going to keep going here. And we'll take a break probably in about half an hour for those of you that are worried about such a thing, which is totally understandable. Now, what we want to do next in lab 2 is create a host metric source. In this case, we have our collector, but we don't have any data that we're ingesting from our collector. And that's what we want to do right now. And so what we're going to do next is kind of follow these steps. We're going to go to our collector, which you should see, and we're going to go to the far right of that screen. And for those of you, looks like David's, please hold while we connect to Sumo Logic. Hopefully that's not taking too long. If it is stuck, that's where it becomes possibly I don't want to push the issue on you, but possibly your laptop. Maybe you're locked down. Let's see, progress indicator stop moving. The other thing, David, actually that I should mention, and this is an issue that it can occur on the. It could be locked down. But it could also be, sorry, I'm brain farting here a little bit. If you're using one of the newer Macs, the chip in them essentially is not really, it's not that it's incompatible. It doesn't work great with the collector. And so that could be the issue as well. Yeah, the M1 chip, thank you, Odell, for reminding me. And so if you're using an M1 processor, there might be delays in the installation like you're seeing. It should eventually work. But as you're seeing, David, it's obviously taking a little bit of time. So Melissa as well, same issue. So hopefully you can, hopefully it eventually kind of works out for you. I guess I'll pause, another moment or two for you guys to catch up. But actually the next step, yeah, so Melissa's a Sumo Logic employee. And so we use M1s internally, and so it's causing a little bit of an issue for some of us as well. So I do apologize for that, but I think she kind of thank you for bringing it up because it's worth mentioning as you're experiencing it. All right, so let's go ahead and David's is an Intel i9. Okay, I'm probably over my head in troubleshooting if you're using an i9 still having that issue, but yeah, regardless of, I guess I'll continue here. Really, only the first lab or two utilize this collector. When we get to lab 3 through or 4 through everything else, we're going to use some metrics that are already built in. So, cool. All right, so let's go back to David's International. Not that that should be an excuse, but it could be a connection. I don't know, but at least you're good for right now. So let's see. I'm just looking at the issues here. It looks like Arabella was not able to find the collector name. That's weird. I guess don't worry about it too much. You won't be able to. Yeah, we should be all right. Sorry, just going through the chat we have going here. Okay, I think we're good. And Odell can help out. Yeah, Odell. Okay, all right. I think we're going to keep continuing. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add our source of data to the collector. The collector is installed, it's sitting on our laptop, and now we want to tell it, hey, grab some data. To do so, we're going to go to add right over here and specifically add a source. We want to add a source of data. Now, what type of data do we want to add? We have many options here. We can add local file data, which is more log related. We can add Docker information, not today's conversation. For today, we've been talking about metrics, more specifically host metrics. So what I want you to do is select the box that says host metrics and go ahead and click on it. Now, what we're telling the system is what host metrics do we want to grab? And so we're going to fill in the blank here and start to describe the metrics that we want to ingest and the naming convention we want to utilize when they're ingested. So the first thing we're going to start with is the name. Well, the name can be pretty generic. I'm going to call mine host metrics JB. Now, the source category is going to be, I was going to say critical. I don't know how. Yeah, it's pretty important here because this is going to be the label that we provide to our data. Because in a few moments, we're going to want to look for our data. And so we can start to look for our data utilizing source categories. In this case, we want to give the source category an appropriate name for our data. And so I'm going to call mine host metrics /JB. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it with multiple levels, which is what the slash is indicating. But I'd encourage you to use a name pretty similar to mine because you're going to need to look for it a few moments. And if you know the name, it will be easier to find. Now, the scan interval. How frequently do we want our device? Remember, we're sending these instructions to our laptop, or in my case, my laptop. How frequently do I want my laptop scanned for the data and sent to Sumo Logic? Do I want to scan every 10 seconds? Do I want to scan every 5 minutes or somewhere in between? As it says here, the more frequent the call, essentially the more expensive it could be because you're doing more frequency. You're calling more frequent. Now, in this case, I want my data more frequent. I don't want to have to wait for 5 minutes for my data to show up. I want to wait 10 seconds. I want it right away, especially in a lab environment, a training environment. I want to show you the latest and greatest quickly. So I'm going to choose 10 seconds. Feel free to choose whatever you'd like. In this case, I'd encourage you to take a lower interval or smaller interval so you get data more frequently, but we're playing around. Choose the thing you want. Now, how frequently do we want that data? More specifically, what data do we want? And that's what we get to choose in metrics. Do we want CPU data from our laptop? Do we want memory data? Do we want TCP? Do we want network data? Do we want disk data? More specifically, do we want our CPU user, our CPU sys, our CPU nice, our idle, et cetera, et cetera? And for somebody that needs to utilize these things, these become more important. On the right, it shows you what they are in case you're not aware. And in this case, I want all my data and I want my data quickly. And so I'm going to say, send me everything essentially. Now, when I click save, those instructions are now being sent to my laptop, more specifically the collector on my laptop. And now my laptop knows, hey, look for CPU, look for host, look for disk usage, look, those things I just specified. When I get returned to the screen, I should now have a new line here representing my metrics, specifying the metrics I want. And now what I should be able to do to take this a step further is actually start to view these metrics. And so what I can do here, and it might take a moment because your collector might take a few seconds, but what I should be able to do now is go to my source category name. When I go near it to the right, there should be a open in metrics icon. And now what I should be viewing, fingers crossed, are my metrics, and I am. Here is my metric for memory total. Here's my metric for disk usage, for disk availability, and so on and so forth. And now these are starting to populate. And now I'm starting to get insight into my laptop. I am now viewing my laptop's information or status, or I guess whatever kind of adjective you want to use there, through Sumo Logic. That's kind of cool. I am now looking at this laptop based in Portland, Oregon, anywhere in the world, and I can now share this data and so on and so forth. So let's see, and that will conclude lab 2. So I think 2 of us are having some issues. I apologize for that, Arabelle and Melissa. but after lab 2 or 3, we don't really use the collector anymore. Actually, maybe lab 4 we do as well. Yeah, so I just apologize for that. Once we get on a break, I can try and help you troubleshoot a little bit more with that, and which we'll do in a few moments. So. All right, so what I'm going to do is continue with lab 3. So in lab 3, what we want to do is we want to create a query to visualize our metrics. We're collecting our metrics now, and now we want to visualize them. The query I just did, or not even well, it is a query, but when I just went to collection and clicked on that, I'm now viewing my metrics, but let's go ahead and get a little more in depth. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new metrics tab. To do so, I'm going to go to the plus new, the blue icon, and click on metrics. And now I'm in the metrics environment. Now, there's a couple different flavors of the metrics environment, and this is going to get a little, hopefully not too confusing, but we have a couple different UIs, if you will, or not even, I guess UX is more user experience. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what the differences are. As it says in the lab guide, there's going to be 2 different options here of what shows up in this line A. If you see line A looking like it does on my screen, where it shows the metric query and the filter, we're looking at an interface that we're going to call advanced mode. Advanced mode is useful, but we also have the ability to go to the 3 dots. Oh, wait, that's if you see the, oh, it changed again. So by default, the options right here is the basic mode. If you click on the 3 dots, we can go to advanced mode. And what the advanced mode gives us is more of a traditional query line. And so we're going to flip through both of them kind of periodically in each lab. But in this case, what we want to do is go back to the more traditional environment, the basic mode, which looks like this. Now, what we can do in here is we can start to describe what metric we want to look at. There's a lot of different metrics. As we just discussed, there's the CPU, there's memory, there's disk usage. Well, here's all the metrics that are captured in Sumo Logic. Now, in this case, we want to look for a specific metric. The specific metric we want to look for here is called CPU load av 15 minutes. Now, by clicking this option and clicking search, I'm saying, show me the CPU load average times that exist within the system. By default, I get put into this time series view. And what I want to do here is I want to select the chart option because I want a visualization. When I click the chart option, what I get, and it's going to look crazy, but it should look crazy, is I get all these different metrics. Excuse me, let me rephrase that. I get all the metrics for CPU load average 15 minutes, but I get a variety of different sources of data. I get my data. I get your data. I get our test data. I get a variety of different data. I actually get 462 different CPU load average data. There's that many different data points there's that many different collectors collecting CPU load average. Yeah, I guess that's the way to say it. Now this chart looks quite crazy, as it should, but it is showing what we requested. What we can do now is we can start to utilize our filter. Excuse me. So if we wanted to filter our data, and let's say we just want to look for the source category of our host metrics, we can specify filter of source category equals host metrics. And if I wanted to look at my metrics, I can go ahead and select them. And now when I click enter, or really click the search icon, now this chart should be cleaned up because now I'm looking just at my CPU load average. I'm not looking at all 462. I'm looking at just a specific one. And as we see, my load average is pretty level. I mean, my processor is not being very intensively used, although I guess it is. I'm running Zoom, but we see it's pretty level-ish. Now, what we could do in step 6 of this lab is we can add another metric query here. In this case, I'm looking at one metric query, which is CPU load average for host metrics JB. But what if I wanted to look at another one here? Well, I can do so. I can just click on this plus, and now I'm adding another line. Now in this line, what we want to do is I still want to look at that CPU load average. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to utilize an operator. I want to say for line B, show me all the CPU load averages, those 462 of them, but average them out. What is the average CPU load average? Average CPU load average. Yeah, I guess that's the correct way to say it. And so what I should start to see here are now two lines. The top, or this lighter blue line, is representing B. And by representing B, it's representing the average. And we see mine specifically down below here. And so mine is lower than the average. That's good. I have CPU resources I can utilize or maybe farm out or whatever. And that's what's being told to me right here. And as it says, well done, you've created a query in basic mode. And that's important. That's a good thing to do. All right, so let's go into lab 4. Now, lab 4 is going to introduce the idea of apps, and hopefully you've attended one of our classes before. If you haven't, that's okay. And hopefully you're aware of the concept of apps within Sumo Logic, because it's different from other companies' version of apps. When I say the word app, what do you think of? Well, there could be a million different things you think of. You might think of an internet app or an application like we just installed. Now, what we're referring to when we say app in Sumo Logic's world is we're talking about out-of-the-box content. And essentially out-of-the-box content that you can easily use against your set of data. And so let's go ahead and look at this now. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the left-hand side of the screen, the black bar, and go to the app catalog. When we do, we see all the apps that are available to us within Sumo Logic. There's going to be about, I don't know, maybe 200 or so, and they're going to represent all different sources of data. There's an app for GitHub data. There's an app for Linux data. There's an app for PagerDuty data. There's an app for Twistlock, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in today's example, we're really concerned about, or not concerned, but want to use an app called Hostmetrics. So what I've done is I've gone into the app catalog. I've gone into just the filter, the search option, and I'm looking specifically for an app called Hostmetrics. Once I find it, I can click on it. Now, what this Hostmetrics app is going to give me, and I kind of see some previews down below, is insight into my data, specifically insight to my Hostmetrics data. More specifically, insight into all those metrics that I was describing earlier. The CPU. Now, these are just screenshots. This is not actual data yet, but isn't this a cool map? Not a map, a visual. It's showing my CPU. It's showing it over time. It's showing it against another instance. I see the spikes. I see the peaks, the valleys, all that. Memory, same idea. I see memory usage, when it's high, when it's low, buffer memory, all that good stuff that somebody in your organization probably cares about. And I want to apply this to my data. So how do I do it? Really simple. I'm going to click Add Integration. And I think in the lab guide, it says add to library. The formatting or the DUI for this has changed the touch, and I haven't updated it yet in the lab, which I should have, so that's bad on me, but we can still follow along. So what I'm going to do here is, like I said, I'm going to go into collection. I'm going to go to Hostmetrics. I'm going to go ahead and click next here. And I'm going to specify right here what Hostmetrics I want to look at. In this case, I want to use the Hostmetrics that I am ingesting via my collector. So what I want to do is Hostmetrics/JB. I can decide where I want to save that folder. Do I want to give it a name? This should work, Hostmetrics. Yeah. And now I'm going to go ahead and click next. Now what's happening here, or should be happening here, is the system is referencing my source category of Hostmetrics JB. It's referencing all these queries and dashboards that somebody at Sumo has created, and it's, for lack of a technical phrase, smushing the two together. And so it'll take a few moments. This is kind of a little longer than normal, but I'll go ahead and let it finish up. And there we go. And what I should get is success. Now, getting success is cool, but I want to actually show the success that occurred here. So what I want to do is I want to go to my personal folder. And in my personal folder should be a folder now called host metrics. In that host metrics folder now should be the metrics that I'm interested in. So let's say I want to look at the overview first. I am now looking at my laptop's device, and I'm seeing the CPU load average for 1 minute, 5 minutes, and 15 minutes, the buffering, et cetera, et cetera. All things that you or maybe somebody in your organization is going to get some value out of. And so I get this visual representation, very kind of impressive visual representation. It looks fancy. And as you saw, I didn't really do much work to get it. I told the system where my data is, what type of data it is, and poof, I get value. And so these apps are really helpful in that sense. We would encourage you, anytime you ingest a new set of data into Sumo Logic, whether it's logs or metrics, to come into the app catalog and see, is there an app that might be helpful for you? Because it may be, it may not be, but it's going to give you some insight into what's possible with your data. And so it's really good, certainly to utilize right away, but it might give you some inspiration, if you will, as well. All right, so that concludes, let me see, let's see for that lab. What I wanted to show here is in these. So let's take this one here, for example. We can click on the icon over here to actually look at the query. So how was this chart created? What query was used to create it? Well, you might even know it's probably the filter of the host metric CPU load average, but we can verify that. If I click on that icon, now I start to see my query. And so what this map or this graph is actually 3 different queries. It's the 1 minute query, it's the 5 minute query, and it's the 15 minute query, but all presented together. And so as a reminder, we can go ahead and show those different metrics together. All right, let's see here. Something else that we'll point out in the lab guide is if we go to new, either way we do it. If we go to new and metrics, sorry, what we want to show here is some of the advanced capabilities that are available. So with our metrics, we can start to decide, and I'll use just the query I already have over here. Oh, where is it? Over here, but I can start to change things related to how this information is displayed and look and feel. Do I want to change the color palette? Not a big deal, but for some customers, this is. I can go ahead and label the axes. I can modify the legend. I can even take this graph or this chart, view it in JSON format and modify it. So maybe I want to actually just mess around with the pure JSON and change the font size and do things in here. I can do that as well. The idea or the end result here is many options. So as much customization you want to do with your stuff, you can do so within Sumo. All right, let's see. So that should just about conclude lab 4. I'm going to go back to the slides. I'm just going to run through them just to kind of keep me honest here. And then, let's just see where we are. So, so as we were starting to look at with the host metrics, there's 2 different interfaces. There's the classic interface and the new version. The new is recommended, it's the way to go. However, you might be using the classic if you're using, as it says here, kind of our legacy applications. So if you're a brand new customer to Sumo Logic, both you and your organization, and today's the first day using Sumo, new metrics, that's the way to go. It's new, it's the latest, the greatest, and that's what we would encourage. However, if you're a company that's been using Sumo for a little bit, you might be still using some classic metrics interfaces. You might have some of those older queries. And so I just want you to be aware that those exist, that you might see 2 different interfaces. As we tried to describe, you can modify the interface view or mode, as we call it, by toggling it here, but just want to introduce that there are 2 different. And I do validate or confirm it is a touch confusing, but right now we have 2 good solutions, and we're filtering them down just to ultimately use the one new method is the future, but wanted to show both. Let's see what else in here. So the new metrics interface, sorry, versus that classic. One of the other big differences is simply where the query goes. So as you see here with the new metrics interface, the query goes on the top of the screen. With the classic metric interface, the query goes on the bottom of the screen, just different way of doing things. Don't need to go too much deeper than that. With the basic query mode, we got to see that pull down. So we see the metric list that's automatically generated with all the metrics that exist within your environment. And so you can use the search ahead or the pull down pick list to just grab one, which is a lot easier than needing to know what it is. Let's see the advanced query mode. We talked about some of that already. The metrics app we just did. And so we did labs 1 through 4 already. So let's go ahead and we'll do labs 5 and 6, and then we'll probably take a break. Time-wise, I think we're doing pretty good. So yeah, let's do lab 5 and 6. So just get back into Sumo. And so using my lab guide. In lab 5, what we want to do is we want to look at metrics queries, but we want to look at the idea of joining them, taking two queries and utilizing them both at the same time. So we're going to go through this together. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a new metrics window, new metrics. And now we're going to go ahead and look for two different sets of data. And I should have read this line right here, because what we want to do is we want to look at ingesting network data, network metrics, and we want to look at the net difference between incoming traffic and outgoing traffic. So we want to look at incoming, we want to look at outgoing, and we want to compare the two. And so that's what we're going to do here. So in row A up here, or line A up here, we're going to start to enter the first query. So the first thing we want to look for are the net in bytes. So the metric is going to be called net underscore in bytes. Now, specifically, we want to look at for in bytes, but we want to look at the rate of them. And we want to look at the sum. So what I want to do is I want to enter like I just did up here. And I'm going to search because I just want to run this query and make sure it works. Make sure the things I typed in actually bring back results. And they do, which is good. So what I start to see is my chart with my in bytes. Okay, good. Incoming traffic, now monitoring it, or not monitoring it, we're now viewing it in our chart. Next thing is we want to do outbound traffic. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a new line or new query, the plus. And you can participate in this lab even if the collector, your collector previously wasn't working. We're not really going to go back to the collectors anytime soon. So in line B, what we're going to do is look for net, easy for me to say, net out bytes. And we're going to do the rate and the sum. Now, when I click start or search or enter, now I have two lines. Kind of overlapping. The visual here is, I don't know, it might be helpful, might not be, but we're now starting to see those two lines. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to do a third line. And what we're going to do in that third line is say, take line A, take line B, subtract one from the other, and give us line C. So we're going to create a new variable called £C. And so we're going to go ahead and specify what we want in there. What we want to do in line C is we want to take B and subtract it from A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to line C, and I'm going to go to my three dots over here. I'm going to go into advanced mode. And what I'm going to say is, in this case, I want to subtract A from B. And so I'm going to say take B and subtract A. Now, when I hit enter, I should have three lines. Actually, so we changed the UI. It's actually better right now. By default, what I was expecting is when I run this, I would get all three lines. because I'm going to get my A line, my B line, and my C line, which is B minus A. What the system did for me, which was actually helpful, is it turned off B and A. And so now I see only line C, which is showing me the difference between out and in at a period of time. Here it was low, here it was high, and I'm starting to get that value. And so as it says in that step 8, the hiding actually should occur automatically, which, like I said, was a pleasant surprise, but it did that for me, which is cool. And so now I have, as it says, that basic line chart of traffic over time, excuse me. All right, let's continue. Let's go to lab 6. So in lab 6, we're going to go ahead and utilize, of course, the metric query. We're going to use the advanced mode. So I want to go into lab 6, and I want to go to new and metrics. If you find that there's too many tabs on the screen and they're just getting annoying at this point, you can feel free to close them. Yeah, feel free to close them. We don't really go back to them. So I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, do that new metrics. And I'm going to go ahead and switch to advanced mode. Remember, advanced mode is where there are not the pre-populated fill-ins. The mode should inherit what you had previously chosen. So as you saw, I was in basic mode first, and then I switched to advanced mode, and then I opened a new tab, and that new tab now should be advanced mode because that's the last selection I chose. And what we want to do here is we want to look at some filters. Specifically, I don't know, we're going to look at all of them, but we see the top K, the bottom K, and the filter. And so we're going to play around with filtering. In this example, what we're going to do is we're going to look at CPU system. So our CPU sys is the metric that we're interested in. So what we're going to do is we're going to specify. We could specify source category, but in this case, we're going to use content type. And when I choose content type, I should have a pull down with a bunch of different values. The value I want for today is going to be host metrics. Now here I can say, show me just the content type for host metrics, and I can click search. And I get a lot of different host metrics because there's thousands of them. But what I want to do here, and I apologize, I just had said that we don't need to use the source categories we just created, and I was incorrect about that. I forgot we actually do right now. So what I want to do here is I want to specify just my source category. So now I'm going to use, come on, source category equals what I call it, host metrics /JB. I'm going to run it just to make sure it works. But now at this point, I'm getting all my host metrics. Now I only want specifically the metric related to CPU sys. So now when I hit enter, return, now I should be looking at a single metric. And here's my CPU usage. It's going up, it's going down, whatever. Now what we want to introduce next here is the filtering option. And so in this case, what we're going to do is use a filter to say, only show me data that's within a certain range. In this case, what if I want to filter between 0 to 10? Well, pretty straightforward. I'm going to use a pipe, which is going to represent a separation of a line, essentially. And I'm now going to describe the filter I want to use. It's a filter, so I'm going to type the word filter. And I'm going to start to define the min. The min is greater than 0, and the max is less than 10. Typos all over the place. And I'm going to run this. Now, my value, this should work because my values are in between 0 and 10. And so I'm now utilizing this filter, and it's showing me those results. If I modify this filter from 10 to 20, I'm going to get no results because I don't have any results that are within this min and max. All my results are within a range of, what was it, about 2 to 5 or so. But that's how we can start to utilize our filters here. Min being minimum, max being maximum, should be pretty obvious, but I guess I'll state it anyhow. And so that's how we can start to utilize filters. Another example, if we're looking at the CPU sys, once again, is we could use a filter average. We could say, just show us where the average is greater than 95. Now, when I run this, I'm not going to get any results because all of it is above 95. But what I could do is remove everything else and say, just show me the metric, the CPU sys metric, when it's over 95. And that's what I start to see here. Only these couple of points fit our criteria because at one point they were above 95 in our time period. So just the way that filtering can be used. Filtering is very common in Sumo Logic. It's the best way to filter your data, hence the name. So this is certainly a useful way to do so. All right, let's go ahead and let's take a break now. We're doing pretty good on time, like I mentioned. Let's do a full 10-minute break. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. Let me get my timer going here. There we go. So 10 minutes, go ahead, grab a beverage, grab a snack. I'm going to step away, maybe a bio break, and then we'll come back. We'll do a few more labs and we'll get into the exam. So once we get back, we'll kind of be in the home stretch, which I think everyone will appreciate. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and step away. If you have any questions, go and put them in the chat. I'll get to them when I get back. And, like I said, once you come back, we'll get ready to finish up and conclude the day. So thank you, everybody, for attending so far, and talk to you all in a few moments. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you had a good little break there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and continue. So let me get on my timer and let's get back into our lab guide. So what we want to do is we had just finished lab 6. Yep. And so after 6 comes 7. So let's jump into lab 7. With lab 7, what we're going to start to look at is AWS data, specifically load balancer data. So this is an example of data we have within our training environment that we're going to utilize. Once again, doesn't rely on that collector that we installed earlier. So everybody should be able to participate in these steps. So as it says, our AWS ALB data has been ingested. And so this is going to be load balancer data. And so what we want to do now is find it. So let's go ahead and do so. I'm going to do a new query, a new metric search. And now I'm going to specify the query. Now the query I want to run is in the lab. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste it. And in this case, I want to be in the advanced mode. So I want to just be able to paste my query right here. When I run it, I should get data. I should get a lot of data, but that's good. A lot of data is not a bad problem here. So if I go to my chart, as shown earlier, it's quite busy because this is 861 different sets of data that match my criteria. So quite a lot of data is being returned. But in the time series, we can start to see this data as well. Now, what we want to do here is we want to introduce the idea of not introduce the idea, it's just something we've been doing, but we can go ahead and specify a specific metric. Because right now I'm saying, show me all the ALB metrics. But what I really want to do here is I want to specify and just show me the metric that's associated with HTTP codes. So when you go to a website and you get a or you or the website keeps track of the success of the status of that website or that visit rather, excuse me, this is allowing us to start to look into these statuses. So when I click start or enter, going to have less data because I'm filtering down my data. So what I now see here are all these different time series, specifically 42 of them, that match my criteria, that show me the ELB counts for my ALB metrics. Now, what we can do next here is we can start to utilize the average operator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first modify this line and do pipe AVG, which is going to give me my average. So this is now showing me the ALB metrics, excuse me, for the ELB count, an average of it over the last 15 minutes. Now, this might be helpful to me. Hopefully it is if I'm looking at it. And what it's showing me is the average seems to be between 10 and 15. Big spike over here, but it's pretty consistent. Actually, I take that back. It's very inconsistent, but it's consistent in its inconsistency. Now, what I want to do next is I want to look at a different time period. And that's what I'm going to do in this next line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add another query line. And in this case, I'm going to paste the line, which is going to be basically the same as the first line. The difference is I'm adding this portion right here that says time shift 1 day, or 1D, which represents 1 day. And what that is going to represent or allow me to do is look at that average for today, look at that average yesterday, and show me both values or both results. So now when I click enter, I should have 2 results. They're going to be the same because remember, this is a training environment. The data is replicating or reproduced consistently. And so it's not really a big surprise that yesterday's data and today's data look the same because it's the same data. But this could show us something quite different as well. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to utilize our app. Let's say, as we are right now, we're looking at this ALB, this load balancing data. This query I just did might be helpful. Honestly, it probably isn't. It's not very in-depth. What I want to do is I want to use the app to show me what are some good queries that someone at Sumo has created that might be helpful against my data. So what I'm going to do this is I'm going to go to my app catalog, and I'm going to type or look for the app that's called AWS ELB, or I really spelled out, Elastic Load Balancer. And we want this one on the far right. So I'm going to go ahead and click this guy. Once again, it's going to show me some stuff that it's about to provide to me, which looks kind of cool. I want that. And now I need to tell it how to find that. So I'm going to click Add Integration. I'm going to just click Next here. I can skip this step. And now I need to specify where my data is. Now, in this case, the source category that we're using for this labs data is labs/AWS/ALB/metrics. Not case sensitive, so should not matter either way if you do all caps or not. And now I'm going to click Next. And now remember, the query is, or the app is now trying to take this ALB data, take these queries that are helpful, and give me some output. And so let's see what it's about to provide to me. Taking a few moments, but that's okay. Cool. And so now it says success. So now what I should be able to do is go to my personal folder on the left-hand side of the screen. And now there should be two. There might be more if this is a training account. You might have other people that have entered their stuff in here. But what I should find is my AWS ELB metrics. And ideally, by clicking on them, let's see what that would show. There we go. We want to use the application load balancer ones. And so now I'm starting to see this data. Once again, there's a lot of data, so it's quite messy, but this is helpful. So here I'm seeing my availability zones. This is AWS. So I'm seeing the US East 1A, US East 1B, 2A, 2B. I can click on these and start to turn them on and off. If I just want to see the 1B, there it is. If I want to compare it to 1B over here, now I am. If I want to compare 1A to 1B, which that's really not these can't really be compared in that way, I could, or I could turn them on both in the same chart. So I had that flexibility. The other thing we want to point out here is the funnel, or the well, yeah, this funnel icon. So as I was showing here, I can physically, I guess as much as can be said, click on these to turn them on and off. But I can also use the filtering up here to filter. So let's say I just want to look at the availability zone for, like I was saying, US East 1B. I can specify that, and it's now going to be specified across all my charts in here. All of these are only going to show US East 1B data. There might be a lot of different data. There's staging data, there's development data, there's production data, but it's only going to be US East 1B. Conversely, if I wanted to choose 2A, I could do so quite easily. And so this filtering that's built in here and giving you the ability to do so is quite encouraged. Filtering is good. Let's see. The other thing we can do in here is we can go ahead and click on one of the dashboards. It doesn't really matter which one. I think we specify this average request per load balancer, but any of them are fine. And what I want to show, I think I showed this earlier already, actually, is the idea is by clicking on that icon, now I see the query. So here is the query that is being used to look for or display that graph. We're just looking at US East 2A. We're just looking for AWS data. We're just looking for this source category. And so all of it is described in right here. And so when we run this, it should show that data. There we go. All right. Yeah, that's all for Lab 7. Now, Lab 8, what we want to do is show you the idea, not the idea, of logs to metrics. So what this is going to discuss is exactly that, a feature that we call, it's a rule that you're going to be able to set up, and I'm going to show it to you in a moment, called logs to metrics. What it does is exactly what it sounds like. It takes your logs and extracts metrics from them. Now, why would you want to do that? The reason you'd want to do that is logs and metrics are retained differently, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. But they are also, you're charged differently for them. We're not going to get really into details on that right now. But the idea is that keeping your logs might be more verbose than you need. Keeping just the metrics might be sufficient. And so what I want to do is show you how that works, go through an example, and yeah, show you how it works. So what I'm going to do, and this is also a feature that in the real world you may not have access to, just because an admin can say, I don't want you doing this. But in this example, we do, because that's why we're here together. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go into the left-hand nav bar. Under managed data should be metrics. Now in here are some metrics rules that are set up already, but what we're focused on is the logs to metrics rule or section. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new rule. And the new rule we're going to create is taking our logs, specifically lab Apache access logs, and converting them into metrics. And so what we're going to do is just really go through these steps together. So I'm now in my logs to metrics tab or environment. I'm going to click on add because I want to do a new rule. Now I want to give the rule a name. So the name really doesn't matter. I'm going to call it logs L2M JB234. Now we want to identify the scope. What set of data do we want to convert from logs to metrics? Well, the data that I want to scope or choose is labs Apache access data. When I enter that scope, I now see a preview of those labs logs down below. Excuse me. So what I see here is a log message, another log message, another log message, another one, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm going to do next here is parse this log message. And I'm going to take the log message and turn it into fields. Parsing is something we talk about in more detail in our search mastery class, but we're going to utilize it right here. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, take this log message and slice and dice it and provide or create the fields that I want. When I do that, not be saved. What do I have a typo in here? Let's see. Let me just do this one more time. I don't want to spend too much time troubleshooting this. But I do want it to work. What part is invalid here? Let's see. I'm not quite sure why it's being shown as valid. Scope is correct. This is weird. It was not exactly what I'm expecting, but let's see if we can figure this out. So I have my logs, I got my expression here, which is parsing, and that's fine. I don't know why I'm getting an error. I'm assuming it's a silly typo somewhere. Curious if any of yours worked. But what I'm going to do, how am I going to cheat this? Let me go back to my log and metrics rule and just see if I have one that's set up already. And we can check, actually I can show any of these. So let me go ahead. So what we have is our rule, our set of data, our expression. Not quite sure why it's working here, but regardless it is. And what we see with this expression is now the data in those log messages being parsed out. So we see for each log message, the size, the URL, the status code, the source IP. These are all valuable fields of data. But what we're doing here is, remember, we're taking our logs and we're converting them into metrics. So what we want to do is we want to specify what metric we want to create. In this case, what we want to look at is we want to look at the size metric, which is represented right here. We also want to look at the status code. And so we're going to specify what portions of the metrics or what fields we want. In this case, we can decide the field that we want to utilize. And do we want to utilize the metric, which is going to be that numeric value over time? Once again, we talked about that ad nauseum earlier. Or is it going to be a dimension? And the dimension is essentially going to be a field that we want to filter our data by. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make our size our metric and our status code our dimension, which is going to allow us to look at different status codes and those sizes. Now, before we can save this, we have to estimate the DPM. And what the estimate the DPM is essentially estimating how much this is going to cost you. All accounts, or virtually all accounts, will have DPMs, or data points per minute, available to you. It's basically how many cycles you can use. And so it's showing us here, we have 400,000 cycles purchased, and we have, in this case, a negative number, which is kind of weird. Once again, a training environment, but we're able to see here the value and how many DPMs this is going to use. David, thanks for confirming the regex didn't work. Well, I'm not happy it didn't work. There's confirmation that it's not just me. I think there's just an extra space in that query, so I'll modify that later, but thank you for validating. Now, once I have this all filled out, now I can click save. And what's going to happen when I click save is now a metric should be created from my logs. And so what I want to do next is I want to now look for those metrics. And so what I'm going to do is utilize the query in step 10. I'm going to go to a new metric screen. I'm going to use my advanced mode. And I'm going to go ahead and use the metric provided, the query provided in step 10, which is saying, look for our metrics from logs, look specifically for the metric size, and look for the status codes. Now, when I run this, excuse me, for this, let me rephrase that because I've got ahead of myself. Looking for the metrics from logs, so the log to metrics rule we just created, looking for the size, but looking specifically just for the status code of 200. Not all the status codes, but just 200. So when I click search or start, I now see all these different sizes that have a status of 200. If I go to a chart, it's going to be, actually, it's not too bad. It's cleaner than I thought. Oh, once again, the data is being replicated. So all of these rules match this criteria, which is fine. But what we can do here is we can then take the average, which is not going to, it's going to look the same, unfortunately, because the average of consistency is consistency. But we could start to see that in here. But now the important point of this is the fact that we're now looking at metrics. We ingested those logs, but we're viewing them as metrics. All right. I think we have one more lab, maybe two more, but we're just about, yeah, one lab and then one cleanup. So let's jump into lab 9, and this will kind of take us home here. So in lab 9, and lab 9's, they're all important, but lab 9 is monitoring metrics. So using the dashboards and, more importantly, using alerts. And so that's really what I want to show us. As I mentioned, and in hindsight, I did not do this lab properly. What I should have done here is created a dashboard with my queries that I have been using already today. And so I apologize, I was not doing that. But to do so, we just can add to that dashboard. So here I have this panel of metric goodness. If I want to create a dashboard out of it, I just click add to dashboard. I give a panel a name. I'll call it L to M for now. And I specify a dashboard I want to use. In this case, I'm going to use just a dashboard. I'm going to call JB234. And I'm just going to click add. And so now I have the start of my dashboard. And so hopefully dashboards aren't new to you. Hopefully you've seen them in Sumo Logic before. I'm going to sort of presuppose you have, and I've been showing them today. But we can create our own dashboard. Now, what's really more important in here, that in this lab that I really want to go through, is the monitoring section, which is the metric monitor. So the fact that we can create a dashboard is great, and hopefully you now are, so how to do it. But let's go into the metric monitors, because this is really the critical thing that I think of, at least being critical, in that it's great to see when your CPU usage spikes, or when your amount of 200s is greater than what it might be compared to yesterday. But what's really helpful is being alerted on that so that the system lets you know, hey, you're now above a certain limit. Now go do something about it. And that's what we want to show. So let's go ahead and let's start to look at that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go into manage data. So we're going to the left-hand side of the screen. And we're going to monitoring. Once again, possible in the real world, you don't have access to this. Under monitors, what we see are all those monitors that have been set up, essentially all these alerts that have been set up. We call them monitors, we call it monitoring. It's really alerts. So here's a bunch that have been set up, but I don't want to just show you the ones that have been set up. I want to actually set one up with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to add new monitor. Now, what type of monitor do we want to create? Do we want to create a logs monitor or do we want to create a metrics one? Well, today's class is on metrics, and so we're going to use metrics. We could specify the detection method. Do we want to look at data that's, sorry, let me take a step back. So with the detection method, we can specify a static value saying, maybe we want to look when CPU load average is above 80 or above 85 or below 90 or below 92, or do we want to use the outlier? And what that lets us do, or lets the system do, is start to use previous data values, start to look at when things are normal, and more importantly, when they're not, and letting you know about that abnormality. Now, in this case, we're going to use, actually, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to use static just because that's what I have in there. Now, what I want to do is I want to specify the query I want to use. So there's a query in there. Let me see if it works. It should. Paste it in. Cool. So the query works. And so this is a query on CPU total. So now I'm looking at my CPU usage essentially. What I want to do next is I now want to specify the trigger type. When do I want to get a warning? When my CPU is at some predetermined level. Maybe it's at 100%, maybe it's 50%. In this case, we're hovering around 8 and 10%. But we can specify when we want to get alerted. So we're going to specify critical. And we have the difference of critical and warning. Do we want to just get a warning, or do we want to trigger it as critical? And what we'll see in a moment is we can specify different audiences based on the type of alert. If it's a warning, maybe it just goes to our manager. If it's critical, maybe it goes to the ops team or whatever. So now I can go ahead and start to specify when I want to get warned. So when do I want to get a critical warning? Well, I can put whatever I want in here. We want you to specify greater than 50 over 15 minutes. Now, what this is showing me is my current traffic down below and when I'm going to be triggered or alerted. Maybe I want to look at, instead of 50%, maybe I want to look at 80. Maybe I want to do it over 10 minutes. I have that control and that functionality. Now, once again, with the warning tab, I can specify different results. Maybe it's a critical if it's 80 or above in 10 minutes, but maybe it's just a warning if it's 30 above in 10 minutes. I get to decide that. And we see here the visual representation of the lines, the green representing kind of normal or good, the yellow representing warning, and the red representing critical. Now, I have this monitor starting to be configured, but the next portion is probably the most critical portion, and that's going to be the notification section. When this triggers, who do I want to notify? And how do I want to notify them? Do I want to send them an email? Do I want to send a Slack message? I have a few different options. The most traditional is an email, but who do I want to email? Do I want to email just my manager? Do I want to email my manager and my ops team? I get to decide. What content do I want to put in that notification? Do I want to include a little message like, if you, I don't know, if you got this, remember to reboot the server promptly. I don't, whatever you want to put in here. David, thank you. Way giant tangent, but a good one. What he found is the issue with the regex that we were pasting in. There's a space in there, and it's in a PDF, and it's just screwing everything up. So thank you. That's kind of what I thought it was, but the fact that you actually found it is helpful. So I'll fix that later. But great catch there. And so we'll finish this up once again. You know, it's a critical, and then we basically are done. And so then once we're done here, we can go ahead and click save. Now, in this case, the email is not formally formatted properly because I just didn't feel like typing the whole thing out, but then we would be able to save it. And once we save it, it would look a lot like any of these, like this one. And so we can start to see in here the status of it, when it was created, when it was modified, and we even get some history in here. And I should have saved it. I don't know why I didn't. But what I can do here is I can go to my, let's say this one that somebody else created, and I can see the history. How frequently has this triggered? When did it last trigger? Things like that. So monitoring is a great feature in Sumo. It's used for more than just metrics, but we're showing it here. It's quite helpful for logs as well. Just that's not today's topic. All right. Now, the final thing I want to do, and this is lab 10, is just do some cleanup. The cleanup is going to consist of 2 steps here. The first, and not as, well, I guess they're both equally important. What we want to do is we want to delete the collector, because right now on your laptop, if you were able to install the collector, you now have an agent listening and sending data to Sumo, which is great for a training exercise, but we probably don't want to do that tomorrow and the next day. We don't want your device sending to the training account. That's just not necessary. So what we want to do is delete the collector and delete the collector from 2 places, from Sumo Logic and from your device. And so that's what I'm going to do right now and just show you how to do it. If you're planning to play with this a little bit later, then I wouldn't uninstall it because it's working. But if, you know, for proper cleanup, you should follow these steps. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my collection. Once again, manage data collection. I'm going to look for my collector, and I'm going to delete it. Now, when I click delete here, this is just, and not just, it is doing something important, but it's just deleting the instructions from the collector that's on my laptop. It's not actually deleting that collector. So even though I deleted it right here, the collector is still on my laptop. It's still alive. It's potentially still pinging to Sumo Logic. What I want to do now is sever that connection entirely. So what I'd want to do now is uninstall the app using whatever mechanism you use. In most cases, at least if we're using a Mac, we would now go to applications. We'd go to our Sumo Logic collector, and we would uninstall it. Windows, very similar function. So we'd encourage you to uninstall it since you're not using it anymore. If you don't want to install it, that's fine as well. Uninstalling it is very straightforward. And typing my password is a good start. But then to uninstall it, do we want to reinstall it? Next. And now it's going to uninstall itself. And now we're kind of back to where we were before the class started. So I want to make sure we're all there because I don't want to leave legacy applications running on your devices. All right. So let me go back to my deck. That concludes really the content. In fact, yeah, it really concludes the content. So what I want to do is I want to talk about next steps, which is the certification. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to get into the certification exam, and we're going to take the certification exam, and I'll talk about it as well. With this certification exam, it's important that we don't take the exam as the training user, because the training user will get credit for the exam. We want you by name to get credit for the exam. So we want to log out of our training account. Once we've logged out, we want to log back in using our Sumo Logic credentials that have been provided to us probably by our employer, mostly 99% by your employer. And so I'm going to log in using my Sumo credentials. You might be using Okta, and so you might not, or one login, and so you might not actually have to type them. You might need to go into your Okta and just click on the Sumo Logic icon. But long story short, well, no long story short, is that we get into Sumo Logic as ourselves, and we don't fat finger our passwords. Try it one more time. Why is mine not working? What am I doing wrong? Let me do this one more time. That's sumologic.com. Let me try this one. Sorry, I have way too many accounts, and okay, there we go. Cool. So ideally, you will log in. When you log in, if it's your first time logging into your corporate account, it's going to look like this. And what we want to do is we want to go to certification. Once we get to certification, we want to click on Get Certified. So I'll go through these steps. I'll do them again, but hopefully you're following along. So we want to click on Get Certified. So once again, log in, certification, Get Certified. When we click Get Certified, a new window should open up, and it should take us to the learning portal, which looks a lot like this. Once we're in here, now we can choose to get certified. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Get Certified. In the Get Certified section, we will choose what exam we want to take. Once again, I don't think I mentioned it. These exams are free for you, free for your organization. And I'll talk about the guidelines of taking the exam in just a second as well. For today, we want to take the Metrics Mastery exam. We have it in multiple languages, Japanese. So if it's appropriate, you can take it in Japanese. But for most of us, it's probably going to be English. So we're going to go to the Metrics Mastery exam and click on it. When we first click on it, we're going to click Register for Free. And when we click Register for Free, it's going to give us like a little overview, as it says right here. And we're going to click Start. Now, here's some of the guidelines about the exam. There's 30 questions, and you have 60 minutes to take it. You're not going to need all 60 minutes, but you have it allocated to you. And if you need to use it, of course, please do. It's important to point out this, like all of our, or most of our other exams, are open book, open Google, open Sumo Logic, open Sumo Logic documentation, because you have access to those resources in the real world, and they're good resources to use. And so I think you should be using them here. So keep in mind, this is open book, open Google, open Sumo Logic. So use it. The questions will be in a few different formats, mostly multiple choice, but there will be some matching, a couple drag and drops, those type of things. And then you need a 75 to pass it. If you don't pass it, hopefully you do, but you can take it again. You can take it as many times as you need to take it. And so let me just show you two more things, and then I'm going to really kind of shut up and let you take the exam. So once you get to this screen, you're going to click Next. And when you click Next, in a moment, now you get to the exam. So when you get to the exam, you're going to click Start Assessment. When you click Start Assessment, your 60-minute time period is now starting to tick. And you have your questions here, and you'll go through and you'll answer them using documentation or using what we've learned or whatever. Once you're done, you're going to click Submit All Answers. Now, this next step is not straightforward, and that's why I'm pointing it out. When you click Submit All Answers, you're going to get your score, and hopefully your score is going to be a lot better than mine. And once you get your score, you're going to need to click Close Course. If you do not click Close Course, you do not get credit for the exam, regardless if you pass or not. So it's important that you do click that Close Course button. It's not very intuitive, and that's why I'm mentioning it, but it's important, so do click on it. Let me see what else. I guess the other thing to really remind you of is once you're done with the exam and you pass, you're going to get a certificate. What you want to do is you want to fill out this form. And so once you're done with the exam, fill out the form, and that form will give you access to the Uber Eats credit. Basically, you'll fill out the form, you'll attach your certificate, it will get sent to somebody internally at Sumo, and within about a week, it might be a little longer than 48 hours, you'll get a Uber Eats voucher. So if you're able to attend, we're doing a few more classes this week. I have a class tomorrow and Thursday. If you want to join those classes, take those exams, pass them, you can potentially earn 3 different Uber Eats vouchers for $15 each. So certainly motivation. So that's going to really conclude today's class. So thank you for attending. We'll stay on hold while you take the exam, but just to get you started. So thank you for attending. Hopefully you can join one of our other classes this week. We're going to be doing, what are we doing? Tomorrow we are doing observability fundamentals, and then Thursday is Kubernetes. So if those are interesting to you or sound interesting, please feel free to attend. Other than that, I think we're going to kind of conclude here. So if there's questions, of course, please ask. You guys have been pretty quiet, and that's okay. But do want to thank you for participating today. Thank you for actually participating. Some of you were really involved in the chat and digging into it and showing me where I had a typo with my PDF. And so that's really valuable to me as well. So, all right, so I'm going to go ahead and pause here. If you want to take the exam now, let's do so. You can take it at any point. So I'm going to encourage you to take it now because we're supposed to go for another hour, but life gets in the way. And so I'll let you kind of dictate your own schedules there. But let's go ahead and start. And once again, thank you again, and hope to see you all in the future.